Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Shavi'is, Pedig Beis, Halacha Hey. We're learning today Daf Tezvav. We left off on Daf Yud Dalid Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the dot Tanei Sheish Midos Amru Chachamim Bepul HaMitzri. So we already quoted this brisa last year. We quoted this brisa 2 shiurim ago. And quickly to review, when it comes to the Pul HaMitzri, that we will go with the English fava bean. They say that the way this bean grows physically is that you plant it, it germinates. The next stage will be that the seedling emerges, after which the vegetation or the vegetable part, the green part, begins to grow. And as we learned yesterday, something unique about vegetables, that the beginning of the growth doesn't mean it's their main growth. Actually, even if they grew up until a certain amount, up until when you harvest it, if you have a good rain, it's going to actually grow a lot more because of the current waters. But the vegetable growth begins by the fava bean earlier on. Then you have the flowering, the pot formation, the pot filling, which is the seed, begins to develop. Then it goes into what they call the stage of maturation. And at some point, you harvest it. Okay, now, what is unique about the Pul HaMitzri, as we learned in the Mishnah, is that the intent of the owner who planted his kavanah will determine what will be the determinant, this is our sugya, to know what year does this fava bean come from. What year something comes from is negeya, is very relevant, both concerning the dinam of maisris, because there is a change, as we keep on mentioning, between the second, third and fourth, between the fifth, sixth. You go from maiser sheni to maiser ani, and there's also all of the halachas we're learning the Masechta Shvius. You have to know if something is a product of the 7th year, it will be imbued with the kedusha of Shvius, and it's going to be limited or restricted as we're gonna learn more dinim in this Masechta. So the determinant of other items are very set. Shlish, Lakita, Chanata. The determinant of the Pul HaMitzri of the fava bin will depend on the kavana. And as we actually paskin, like Rab Shimon Shazuri, that if the owner planted it with the intent that he wants to have its seeds, so then the determinant of the year will be from when it takes root. That's Rab Shimon Shazuri, and we paskin like him. If the intent, if the kavana of the planter of the Pul HaMitzri is that the person wants it for its greens, for its vegetation, then it will have a din of all vegetables. That will be bisha'as likitosoi isuroi. It's going to go based on the year that it was actually harvested. And even though we mentioned already twice that there is a machlekes rishonim, whether it is when it's fit to be harvested, whether it's actually harvested, we're going to learn a nuance today that will be based, just saying right now, on those who hold that it's the determinant is when it was actually harvested. So kavana by the Pul HaMitzri will be extremely important. Now, make no mistake, the intent, kavana, determining the halacha is not unique. I just want to share right now in the words of introduction 2 other places in halacha where we see that kavana, the Frierdiker Rebbe borrows the term machshava moyeles for this topic and for other topics. So, for example, we have the sugya of hazmana, the designation. For example, tashmishe kedusha have a certain level of kedusha. So something that's designated to be a tefillin holder, it's called tashmishe kedusha. It's so holy that if you're not going to use it anymore, you have to bury it, right? Like shemus, tashmishe kedusha. What makes something to be tashmishe kedusha doesn't necessarily begin only from when you actually use it, but that's the whole topic. Many opine that when you designate something for a kedusha purpose, that means to be in service of Tanakh, whether it is a scroll, whether it is tefillin or a mezuzah, etc. It already, your kavana designates it, and it already has a din of tashmishe kedusha. We have also, when it comes to the din of tuma and tara, for something to be able to become tameh, it has to be a keli. Keli also would mean a finished product. So what happens if you have a piece of leather, and that piece of leather, the way it is is good to be used as a mat. You can take that piece of leather and make it into a pair of shoes. So there also we have this concept of machshava, that if you intend to use your leather as a mat, so right now it's already a final product and it's susceptible to becoming tummy, right? If you would have designated this leather to turn it into a pair of shoes, so then it's an unfinished product, it will not become susceptible to becoming tummy. Machshava moyelis, your kavana will have a lot of power. So atkan is what we learned.
Didn't we learn in all these things that there has to be an action also to go along with the machshava?
Oh, very good. So once something was already determined based on intent, it won't always be that an intent makes it and an intent unmakes it. Sometimes it's easier to determine something only with machshava, but if you want to make a change, you have to have maisa, which is exactly what the Gabbai is quoting, that we find a lot in the dinim of Tum and Tara. We're going to have something very similar today. And Baruch Hashem, it's a very small daf, which gives us time to learn this thoroughly. It's easy. It's just there's a lot of details, and we're going to go through this slowly. So bidiyuk, exactly. So designating machshava for sure in this topic, that's clearly what was your kavana when you planted it. Your intent will determine. What happens if you change your mind? So we will actually see in one of the cases we will learn in the Braisa. The whole daf today is a Braisa. We're going to learn the Braisa that begins on daf Yud Daled Amud Beis. It's the whole daf Tezvav. It's actually, I hope we have enough time to learn the final case on daf Tezayin on the top. If not, we'll leave it for tomorrow. And this is called the Sheish Midois. We're going to call Midah rule. There are 6 rules that the Chazal said regarding the Pula Mitzvah. Okay, so very good, Daniel. So sometimes if you want to change your kavana, you're going to have to do a maisa, even though the irony will be that the maisa will be a non-maisa. I'll speak it out when we get there. I want to say one more important word of introduction. And people, I know it's a lot of information, and God willing, we're going to have an opportunity to review it enough times. It should really become engraved in our hearts and minds. We learned one of the determinants of the establishment of the year Maaseh Shvius is Shlish. What I'm going to say now is also a din of a Shlish, and it has nothing to do with the determinant of the year. Don't confuse one with the other. There is another topic. I know it sounds similar. It's similar, but it's not the same. And that's called Oinas HaMaisres. Oinas HaMaisres means, and this Oinas HaMaisres is for all that plants, for all that grows. When you plant something, if you harvested that item prior to it reaching a third of its maturation, the same shlish, there's no chiyuv of maisres. I'm not discussing what year it belongs to. That is our sugya. What year? What's the determinant? I'm speaking about a step back, a broader halacha. There's something called Oinas HaMaisres. It's called in English the stage, the tithing stage. In other words, all produce only becomes subject to the Maisres obligation from when it reached a shlish, a third of its development. So we're going to see that in our topic, aside of the question of the determinant of the Pula Mitzri, whether it is, like we just quoted Rab Shimon Shazuri, if the kavana was lezera, it goes after hashrasha. If the intent was for its greens, for the yerek, then the determinant of the year of this Pula Mitzri will be like any other vegetable, likito. Independent of that, there is also, as we find by all plants, we have to establish when did it hit the third to know when did the obligation of tithing b'chlal begin for this. That will be another nuance regarding this braisa. And God willing, if you'll remind me, if I'll forget, at the end of the shir, I'm going to speak something interesting that came to my mind. Why are we learning so much about the Pul HaMitzri? That's not a kasha, but we learned yesterday. We're learning this chevra at the end of the month of Adar, Tavshin Pehei. And for those of us who are learning 3 chapters of Rambam today, yesterday we learned, the famous Perek Vav of Hilchos Tshuva regarding the Egyptians and the question, how did Hashem punish the Egyptians if it was already foretold that va'avadum v'inu oisam arba mea shana, and that Rambam has his response that other people argue with, and I just see a very strong correlation between that and the Mitzrayim and the Pul HaMitzri and the kavana and the intent, as we'll share at the end of the share. Okay, so
Rabbi,
yes.
can I just throw in one comment?
Sure.
There's a very famous Egyptian dish that they also serve all over Israel called ful, F-U-L. And F-U-L could be is ful hamitzri. Maybe that's exactly what you're saying.
Danny, that's exactly it. And it's eaten with china. Ask Aaron Weiss to make it for you.
And it's called ful.
Yes.
And Ashkenazim can't eat it, apparently. It gives them stomach problems.
We're learning about it. We're going to eat it. Let's make a ful.
It's true, but it is an Egyptian dish. I'm just saying. And it's called ful hamitzri.
No, we're not allowed to return to Egypt, but we can take from Egypt.
Are not the same Ashkenazim.
And is it made out of the seeds or is it made out of the greens?
So they cooked it, they boil it, and then they ground it or something like this.
But Yakit, do they make it out of the seeds? Do they make it out of the leaves?
No, the seeds.
Make it out of the seeds.
The beans.
No, it's definitely the seeds.
They're both.
That's exactly what we're
boil
learning
them
over here.
both and then they grind it.
We're going to see today that the ikir is
That's not it. It's brown color.
Okay. The reason why Ashkenazim don't like it is because of the color of the plate. If you give a different Ashkenazic plate, it's about the setting. Okay, Tani Chavir, let's go. Tani, we learned in a brayso. Sheish nidois amru chacham beful. So I'm going to say full. That's it. Now we have it. It's not a pay, it's a fay. Beful amitzri. So the first two we already learned. Number one is zera'oi lezera. If the
proper Hebrew, by the way, is pull with the dagish.
I stand corrected. Pull. Okay, I'm back to this. All right. So zera'oi lezera. If the intent of the one who planted it is that he wants or she wants to use it primarily for its seed. Now, when I say primarily, I want to modify that because it's going to get nuanced. For the seed, they don't care about the greens. That's important. Because if they care about both, that will be case number 3. The person only wants the seeds. They want to make this dish. So we paskin like Rab Shimon Shazuri, that even though there is a green part of it, nevertheless, the determinant is misased lisha'avar. The Braisa is not that detailed in what avar, but we know that the avar is hashrasha. Avar means the past. And like we mentioned yesterday, that it was common that these products were planted towards the end of the Jewish calendar year, and they grew into the new Jewish calendar year. And the topic is, what Ma'aser year does it belong to? So Lisha'avar would mean from the previous year, but from what point? From the Hashrash. She number one. Case number 2 is again simple. That if Zera'oi liyerek, and here again, let's touch yerek only for yerek. You don't care about the beans, you only care about the vegetables. Interestingly, even though that, like we mentioned, b'metzias, the green part, the leafy part, the vegetation part begins earlier. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that it begins earlier, but it keeps on growing according to the rains of the moment. So if it began growing, let's say in the month of Elul, and for whatever reason you harvested in the month of at the end of in Mar Cheshvan, if there's a good rain in Mar Cheshvan, the leaves are going to grow a lot bigger, and it affects the ikir is from the current rains. So it is like any other vegetable, misased laba. Again, the Braisa is not going into the details of what's the laba. Laba means the following year, but it means b'shas likitosai isurai atkan, simple. This is exactly what we spoke out on the Mishnah. Now the Braisa elaborates. Okay, and it's going to be either there were 2 intents or there was a change in intention. So case number 3 is going to take up the whole Amid. And not only is it going to take up the whole Amud, but the way we are going to have the Girsa, the way we're going to learn this, is that because of the details that we're going to write in case number 3, and Daf Tes Vav Amud Beis, the Braisa is going to review case number 3, because we get off and then we come back to the Iker. Now, case number 3 includes 2 sub-cases. One is that lechatchila you planted it for both. Zeroi, what happens if someone plants this pool hamitzri, both lizera and v'yerek? So that's number 1. That's 3A, 3B. Oi, that first zeroi lizera, first you planted it with your kavana that you wanted only for the seed. Only for the seed, it should be hashrash. But at some point, and we'll see at what point, there are many details, v'chishev olav, add the word also, this is very important, not only in case number 3, but also you planted it only for the seed. But then you said, you know what? Why only the seed? I'm going to sell the pula mitzri for the dish over there in Israel, but why not have the vegetables for the salad? And you said, I'm also going to use the yerek. This is important. The also, because there'll be other cases later where you change your mind completely. That's not case number 3. Case number 3 is that both kavanas, either lechatchila you had both kavanas, both lezera and tiyerek, and only in this way, you began lezera, and then you said, you know what? I also want to have yerek. So what's the din? Guys, we're going to learn this slowly.
Can I interject for a second, Rabbi?
Sure.
When you were talking about his intention is one way or the other, does that mean he's just like chucking out the rest of it? So if my intention is the seed, I'm just throwing out the leaves. So therefore,
I want to answer. That's very important. What I actually do after I harvested it won't have an effect. Because Danny is going back to what he mentioned before. You're on the right track. That sometimes your action shows what your intention is. But once you already harvested it, at that point, whatever you do will have no effect. Once the halacha paskin that the way you determine the year is, let's say, hashrasha, for whatever the reason, zoroi lezera hashrasha. Even if later you eat the vegetables, the vegetables also have to be misaser based on the la'avar. Why, Danny? Because when you planted it, you only planted it for the seed.
Okay, but I'm just saying, if I have a pile of seeds and leaves, if I only care about the seeds and I'm throwing out the leaves, am I having to actually tithe, let's say, from one on the other or vice versa?
No, okay, yeah, something else. If any item that I'm throwing out, I don't need to tithe. In other words, it's not a isur chefza. It's that if I want to eat a product, I have to tithe it. Now, I would argue if a person is about to throw out their leaves, you can tell that person, what are you doing? Give it to tzedakah. If I grow produce, Danny, and I don't eat it, let's say I own land in Israel, like many people here, Baruch Hashem, and let's say fruit is growing on their land, and they're leaving it for hefker. They're not chayiv to tithe it. It stays on the tree. It falls off the tree. They're not chayiv to tithe it. They would eat it. They have to tithe it.
Maybe there's a side thing, but like if I bring carrots into my kitchen, I'm using the carrot. Some people taka use the leaves on top of the carrots.
We're going to learn about that. We're going to learn about that. Plenty of that. I remember learning about that, about the carrot and the leaf, about the cheshbon. Very good, Dan. But that's not our topic. You're onto a whole different topic. It's not our topic is, and again, the change of intent is, we'll see the nuance when. We'll see when. For sure before you harvested it. So what's case number 2, guys? Halt up. Both together, or you went in the direction of only lezera, and then you added not only yerek, also yerek. Zokte Braisa, misaser, mizaroi al yirakoi, or al yarkoi, umiyarkoi al zaroi, which means everything continues to be based on the determinant of the hashrasha. Everything remains that way. And why is that? So whoever just said here in our Zoom that the fava, the full tchina, the full dish is made of the seeds, it makes sense to me. In other words, it sounds like that objectively, when Hashem looks at this plant, it's a seed plant. That's the ikar. So when you have an ikar and a truffle, I know I'm mixing other topics, but by brachas, many times when you have an ikar and a truffle, you look at the ikar. So if you had both intentions, or if you had the seed and you added the vegetable, you can add the vegetable. I'm also going to use the vegetable. The primary remains the seed, and therefore the determinant for both is the hashrasha. But
just in this case of the pool is too small. Therefore, they eat it together. They boil it and they grind it.
Okay, say that. Okay, so it doesn't matter. So I take that out. The halacha is, in this case, is that if it's both, either way, either lechatchila both, or you began zera and you added the yerek, halacha says the determinant will be hashrasha. But there's another nuance that's very important. And remember what we said in the introduction. Don't get confused when you see a shlish. Shlish is only by grain, olives, and grapes. I know that. Shlish is only only related to grains, olives, and grapes when we are speaking about the determinant of the year. Now we're mixing in a new topic, and that is oinas hamaisves. So says the Braisa, when do we say that both the seeds and the leaves will always the determinant of the year of maisres? Is it maiser sheni, maiser ani? Is it the second year or the third year? Is it the third year or the fourth year? Is going to be all based on Hashrasha. That's only b'shehevi shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah. This is very important. In other words, since guys Hashrasha is last year, since that product reaching a third of its development is a critical point, and that happened before Rosh Hashanah last year. So now the Braisa is saying, since it happened, and since originally the Kavana was either only for seed, or even for both, but also for seed, so that is why we say that all of it, even though it was harvested, who knows when, 2 months later, it doesn't matter, a day later, Tzom Gedalia, Mar Cheshvan, Kislev, even though there's vegetables, even though you planned from the beginning also to eat the vegetables, it's going to go all Hashrasha, Aber, Avol, Im, Hevi, Shlish, La'achar Rosh Hashanah. But if this entire plant only reached this critical point, Benegeya Oinas HaMaisves, after Rosh Hashanah, so then we split it in half. What does it mean? Then we say the seed, always L'Sha'avar, Zaroi, misaser l'sha'avar, but v'yarkoi misaser b'shas likitosoi isuroi. I love it. In other words, since in this case the crop did not become subject b'chlal to the tithing obligation during the previous year, so now we judge its produce independent one from the other.
Rabbi, how are you translating Hashrasha?
Taking root. I know that germinating, which is the seed dissolving, is connected to the hashrash. Goes together.
And is that the same as the 1/3, or that's different?
No, way before. Okay, this is very important.
Rabbi, that din goes also the opposite from Yerek to Zera?
No, not at all. But the guys were mamash in the middle. So in other words, the rules, the case 3 is simple. Everything Ashrasha. But the Braisa is adding one detail and now another detail. When do we say it's B'Sha'avar? If the Oinas HaMaisres happened Lifnei Rosh Hashanah. If the Oinas HaMaisres happened after Rosh Hashanah, that's like a parenthesis. Then there's another rule. This is all part of 3. What's the other rule? Each one according to itself. It's independent. The seed, Hashrasha. The vegetable, Likita. Now another nuance. Now, what's the other nuance? Bishalakat mimenu. This is another qualification. You have to halt up. Bishalakat mimenu lifnei Rosh Hashanah. No, it's the owner. This is important. We take the owner's intent to use it for seed. And this is where the Gabai's action is important, because there was a change of intent. And here he actually collected some of it, guys. He collected some of it before Rosh Hashanah. I want to say something. If he would have wanted it for the vegetable only, he would have left it in the ground longer. Harvesting it earlier on enables us to always judge all of the seeds, even of the ones that he harvested after Rosh Hashanah, the seed part, Hashrasha. Now, don't forget, the greens, guys, we're speaking about a case where it did not bring a shlish before Rosh Hashanah. If it did not bring a shlish before Rosh Hashanah, we divide it. But what do we say? That all of the seed is harvested on the Hashrasha. If it didn't even reach a third before Rosh Hashanah, that means you maybe have planted it very close before Rosh Hashanah. So the Braisa says another nuance. If you planted it, let's say 2 days before Rosh Hashanah, 3 days, let's say it takes 3 days for it to take root. We wouldn't say that anymore. Because since there was also an intent for the leaves, for you to allow the seeds to have their own independent determinant, some of the seeds needed to be harvested before Rosh Hashanah. But if none of it was harvested before Rosh Hashanah, that means so then we're speaking about where a shlish only came after Rosh Hashanah. So there are many things working against the Hashrasha. It only reached Oynes HaMaisres in the new year. None of it was harvested in the old year. There was also the intent of the greens. When you stack all of this together, now all of it is tithed, all of it, not only the greens. Then Avalam Lakim Emenu La'achar Rosh Hashanah, if none of it was harvested before, Bein Zaroi uBein Yarkoi Misaser Laba. Very good. It's even though you intended for it to be for seed, or at least for seed and for green, we will treat it in ganzen like vegetables. It's keilu you planted it for vegetables. Now all of this is a nuance in the third rule. Be'emes, the third rule is the other direction. That if you planted it with both intentions, or if you planted it only for seeds, even though you added greens, when a shlish happened before Rosh Hashanah, we will judge all of it, even the greens, we will judge it on the Hashrasha, which is on the previous year. Okay? And that's why the Braisa Daf Tes Vav Amud Beis repeats that Zeroi Lizera V'chishev Olav also liyereg. Boyin b'machshava, we go back to his original intent. And what's the original intent? We make believe he intended both in the beginning. And even when you intend for both in the beginning, guys, remember, it goes after the seed. Then you have to have that separate parentheses. When do you do that? Only if it brought a third before Rosh Hashanah. If it brought a third after Rosh Hashanah, then there's another nuance. Either you divide them. When do you divide them? If you harvested at least one seed in the previous year, then you allow yourself to give all of the seeds the determinant of Hashrasha. But if it didn't bring a third before Rosh Hashanah, and it was so close to Rosh Hashanah that you didn't harvest any of it, then it becomes a vegetable. But the yisoid of the third case is that if you have two intentions, seed and greens, even if you had only seed and then you added greens, it's as if you had lechatchila both intentions, the dominant will be the seed. And therefore the dominant will be Hashrasha.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
If you planted it only for the seeds, right? But it arrived at 1/3 after Rosh Hashanah. Do I still?
Then we don't say. Then we didn't have. Then we do not say that it changes. It remains Hashrasha. Very good point, Danny. Why is the Rosh Hashanah relevant? Because there is vegetables, and you also want it for the vegetables. Adding vegetables, that's why you have this.
What I'm finding difficult in the sugya is keeping track. Where does the 1/3 come into play versus Hashrasha versus Lakita? You know, it's like this.
You just get, you have to, I can chazar it. It's when we are adding the Oynes HaMaisres when there's two, when seed and leaves. Seed and leaves, and you want to give me the rule that everything is still the din of a seed? That's only because there was a chiyuv already in the previous year.
But if there's no two things, if it's only one or the other,
then we don't bring in Oynes HaMaisres. Because it's a seed. The din of a seed is Hashrasha. When are you mechuyev to begin tithing? When it reaches a third. I don't care if it reached a third in Mar Cheshvan. But this took root before Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Now we're going on to a fourth case. But you have to remember the third case. Don't remember all of the details. The third case is if it's both. As a general rule, the generalized third case is the seed is the determinant. Hashrash. Fourth case. Now zera'oi liyerek. Initially, you planted it, guys, only for the green, And now, v'chishev olav lizera. And now you are changing your intention, going only from green to only to seed. And here's where Danny reminded us that in other areas in halacha, that once something was already determined, I have this mat, and I decided I'm making it into I have leather. It's a mat. Okay, so now it's already a mukhshal kabel tuma. Now it's susceptible. Now if it gets whatever. Now it's a keli. Now I changed my mind. You change your mind, you have to express it in a mice. In the case of Tuma, the Maisa has to be a positive action. Here, we're going to allow for a negative action to be called an action. But just your intention will not be enough. Now that you designated this for vegetables, it's a din of a vegetable. You want to make it only into seeds? La'olam ein machsheve zera chala olav. And you can't go from greens to seeds. Actually, I think from over here, you see that it's looked halachically almost as if the greens is the ikr. Going from greens to seed is very difficult. Going from seeds to greens are easier halachically. It's the way halacha looks at this pul hamitzri. But point is,
I'm sorry, I don't understand. But why? Why can't you go the other direction?
Maybe because most people plant them also for the greens. Maybe because only using the seed is something unusual. It's you're changing the norm.
Or maybe it's because of the way you treat it while you're growing it, meaning you're giving it more water.
Wait. That's it. Hold on. So the treating it is a thing. Now, guys, like we mentioned yesterday, vegetation, any vegetable benefits from water no matter in what stage of its development it's in. So when you plant something for greens, you would always give it water. The more water, the more it grows. When you change your mind and you say, you know what, I only want it for its seeds. The seeds needed the earlier rains. Current water won't do that much to the seeds. Even if the seeds are not developed, it's spilled milk. It's already la'achar ha'maisa, because the seeds are getting its koyach from the beginning. So if your change of intention is going to be expressed in action, action here doesn't mean a positive action. You're not marking the stone to make sure that it's not it's not something that's not a keli for Hilchas Shabbos Muksa. No, you don't have to. It's that you don't water it. But you're not missing one watering season, you're missing a chazaka 3 times. Let's say that when you plant it for greens, I don't know how it works. Let's say you water it once a week. Every Sunday. 3 Sundays have to pass and you don't water it. Now you showed b'maiseh that you changed your kavanah. Ela imkein mana mimenu shalosh murbiyos. Murbiyos means 3 regular waterings from revia. We know revia is also miloshan cohabitation, because when rain falls, we learned that in Masechta Tainis. Okay, so you got that. So first of all, you have to have a maisa. Second of all, the maisa doesn't have to mean a positive action. It can mean a negative action. I'm not watering it. You have to have 3 such a. Now that I skipped 3 watering periods, is a raya that I'm already expressing my kavana in my non-action. I didn't water it. I don't want the greens. If you would have wanted the greens, even also greens, you would have watered it. But here again, we have to bring in the oinas hamaisres. No, it's even you withholding the 3 murbiyos is in itself not effective, or it will only be effective b'shehevi shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah. You're going back to its seeds. Here again, we bring in oinas hamaisres. So once you change the determinant to Hashrasha happened in the previous year. Now that you're making a change, we want this oinas hamaisres to also be standing. We need for all of it to have reached the 3rd prior to Rosh Hashanah. Aval hevi shlish la'achar Rosh Hashanah. Afilu, now take out the loy. I know that's how people had struggled with Yerushalmi, because it's mamash min hakotza lakotza. Afilu mana mimenu shalosh murbiyos. Important, since the crop was originally intended for greens, and it didn't even reach the 1/3 critical point before Rosh Hashanah, the greens retain their status. Everything is considered secondary to the greens. Even the seeds are buttled to the greens when it comes to the determinant. And when you harvest it, both the greens and the seeds will be determined by the lekita. Gewaldig. Rule number 5. Let's go weiter. Zera'oi lizera. If you planted it originally for its seed, and what you have to add, Similar to case number 3, not the same. Similar, we're beginning the same. You began for seed. Then you decided greens. That change is not that difficult, like we said. Greens to seed, there has to be a misa, a negative misa, the not watering. But going from seeds to greens is an easier change. So we already learned case number 3. But now the Braisa purposefully is going to say like this, that if va'asa kuloi kitzotzin gemurim lifnei Rosh Hashanah, if it completely developed before Rosh Hashanah, right? We were saying that when you add them both together, it goes after Hashrasha. Nevertheless, look at the irony. Yeah, Zaroi, we make it independent. Zaroi misaser l'sha'ava. The seed. But Yarkoi, but the vegetable, if it was fully ready before Rosh Hashanah, but you only harvested it after Rosh Hashanah, so we are following the Rishonim that learned that B'shas likitosoi isuroi is not when it's readied to be harvested, but it's when you actually harvested it. The vegetable will be misaser B'shas likitosoi isuroi. Gewaldig. And why is that? And why is that? Because since you planted it so early in the year, listen to the logic over here. Since you planted it so earlier in the year, we're not speaking about it reaching a third before Rosh Hashanah. We're speaking that all of it was ready. So you planted it earlier. Once the seed reached completion, we considered the seed a separate product. It's amazing. Once since the seed, rule number 3 is you go after the hashrasha. But over here, not only did the hashrasha happen, not only did the oinas hamaisras third happen, everything is completed. Once everything is completed, then for whatever reason you left it in the ground, when you leave it's in the ground, the vegetable keeps on growing. The vegetable keeps on growing. The seed doesn't grow at all. The seed was ready. Nothing grew. So now automatically we divide it into 2. The seeds, Ashurash, is one product. We look at it as 2 different products. And the vegetables is another product. Why? Because the vegetables keep on growing as long as it's in the ground. Gavaldik, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Rabbi.
Huh?
So in this case, we're still allowed to pick the seeds in the next year.
Very
They're
good.
just counted as the previous.
Always, exactly. That's what we're talking about the whole time. So in other words, now, why did the Mesader of this Braisa not add this in case number 3? I don't know. Because really, it's in case number 3, there was this qualification, that qualification, but that's how we did it. And now we have time, Daf Tez Zayin, and now we're learning the final case. And this case was the one that we quoted already 2 times. This will be the case where you're going to have a real mixture. Now, miktsasoi. Now, I want to give an example of Vlad. In this case, very good. Let's go to case number 5. So I have everything was ready before Rosh Hashanah. The seeds are not growing anymore. Me leaving it in the ground will allow the vegetables were ready, but they're going to grow more. So halachically, we view them as separate things. I harvested everything on the middle of Tishrei before Sukkot to have a good full dish for the Yom Tov. It's very easy to separate one from the other. It's very easy because all of the seeds are from, let's say, last year was the 3rd year, and now I'm in the 4th year. Okay, so all of the seeds, Meiser Ani. All of the greens, Meiser Sheni. There's no confusion because the seeds and the greens are Bimitzias, 2 different things, 2 different parts of the plants. Here in the 6th case is where it gets complicated. As we this is the case that we quoted. Now, that this is really, what happens now, again, you planted it real early in the previous year, not Chodesh Elul. Some of it became fully readied. Guys, remember, whatever became fully readied, what will be the din? The din will be that the seeds, l'sha'avar, the greens, when you harvested it in the new year, it's the new year. But some of this product, some of this plantation did not become ready by Rosh Hashanah. It only became ready after Rosh Hashanah. Now, what's going to be the din, Chevra? What did we learn before? What's case number 3? If you planted with 2 intentions, or if you go only from seeds to also greens, if it was not fully ready by Rosh Hashanah, but it reached a shlish by Rosh Hashanah, all of it, even the greens, misaser by Hashrasha. So now I got a problem, because now I'm harvesting everything in middle of Tishrei. Some of its greens are current. Some of its greens is l'sha'avar. So now I'm going to have greens, some of it here, some of it there. What do I do? That's the case where you have a mixture. Now we got it. So and what's the issue?
Why is it l'sha'avar?
Because Danny, like this. Case number 3. That was case number 3. Case number 3, on top of that tesvav and our pagination, is that when you have initially both intents, or if you only had zera and you went to yerek, it's as if you had originally both intents. As long as the product reached shlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah, all of it is misaser hashrasha, even the greens. But some of them reached full maturation before Rosh Hashanah, there, even though the seeds remains l'sha'avar, but the greens is lahaba. So now you have this vegetable patch. You don't know exactly which one it got ready when. You're not putting up sagemi on each one to remember. Some of the greens is l'sha'avar. Some of the greens is labam. So we have, like we said, 2 issues. Issue number 1 is you're not allowed to be taidim ma'aser. You can't be ma'aser from chadash ala yashin yashin. You can't mix 2 years together, even for ma'aser ishain, even for truma. Problem number 2 is b'mitzias. Is it ma'aser sheni? Is it ma'aser ani? And you don't even know the percentage. So says the Braisa, hadahi. This is the case where the Tana teaches that you are allowed to mix them all up together, mix it good up together. It's when you have a mixture, you have a problem with the mixture. What's the solution? Really mix it up. Now that you really mixed it up, problem number one is that you cannot separate one year and the other. I'm going to argue it's so good, so well mixed up that what I remove, the 10%, it will have in it equal proportion. I don't know if Ma'aser Sheni, Ma'aser Ani, that's a problem. You got to do both. How do you do both? All of it Ma'aser Sheni, redeem all of it. All of the money has to be taken to Yerushalmi. And now the redeemed product, all of it has to be given to an Ani. Adahu Yid, Soiver Garden Latoichai, Venimsa, Ma'aser Mizare El Yarkoi, Yarkoi El Zari. That's the meaning of the Brais. So that's all of the 6 cases. And only in the last one did we have the problem that we kept on quoting. Now, I want to quickly mention, like I said before, that it's interesting that it's called the Egyptian bean. Why do we have to remember it's an Egyptian bean? So the sheet of the Rambam, the Egyptians, what was the issue? The issue is that it's amazing. The Rambam in Hilchas Tshuva, in Perek Chamishi, he addresses how do you reconcile Bechira and Hashgacha Pratis, and he gives a resolution, V'ayin Sham. Yediyah and Hashgacha, the Rambam says it's beyond our understanding, as you have to learn the Perek to understand the depth of what the Rambam is saying. He's not saying you don't understand. He's saying something much deeper than that, but these are the way you can make a quick kitzur. He resolves Hashgacha and Bechira. Yediyah and Bechira is something beyond. We have to go back to faith at the end. But in the 6th chapter, he goes back to a specific type of kasha of Bechira and Hashgacha, and that is that God already predetermined that the Egyptians will afflict us for 400 years. And the question is, how can God Almighty punish the Egyptians, which he did for what they did to us when it was already predetermined? So the Rambam's answer is that the decree that God made was on the Egyptians, on a nation, but not on this specific one. And every specific Mitzri could have freely chosen, I'm not going to be the Mitzri that's going to hurt a Jew. And why am I saying that? Because I'm understanding that the reason why it's so difficult to go from vegetable to seed is because generally Pola Mitzri should be looked as vegetation. You want to change it to seed, you're going against, you have to have a Maisa. Every individual plantation, its specific kavanah will determine what it is. That's something unique that we find by the Egyptians. That there can be a general classification of an item, and yet your kavanah will affect the status of this one. Yours can be a vegetables, mine can be a seed. Up to your kavanah. The kavanah of the Egyptian was he made a choice. Ulai. If you have a better reason why we're learning so much about the Pula Mitzvah, you can please share with us. And
I love the
we're not done
connection,
yet with
Rabbi.
this. We're going to continue.